You've been lied to about awakening. They told you it would be beautiful, didn't they? A gentle flowering of consciousness, a peaceful expansion into bliss. What they didn't mention is that spiritual awakening is more like being skinned alive by the universe itself. Most people who begin this journey never finish it, not because they lack dedication or sincerity, but because awakening demands a price that few are willing to pay. It asks you to die while remaining alive. I've watched thousands of sincere seekers turn back when they discovered what this path actually requires. And perhaps that's wise. Because once you truly begin, there's no going back to who you thought you were. So here's my question for you. Are you ready to discover which stage of this magnificent catastrophe you're actually in? Because what I'm about to share might shatter every comfortable illusion you have about your spiritual progress. Ah, the honeymoon phase. How deliciously intoxicating it is when you first taste what lies beyond ordinary consciousness. You remember that moment, don't you? Perhaps it was during meditation when the walls of your mind suddenly dissolved. Or maybe you were walking in nature when you felt yourself merge with everything around you. For a glorious instant, the separate self vanished, and there was only this magnificent, unified awareness. And oh, how enlightened you felt. How special, how chosen, how absolutely certain that you'd found the secret everyone else was missing. The books made sense now. The teachers were speaking directly to you. You joined some invisible club of the awakened. But here's what nobody tells you about this stage. It's the spiritual equivalent of a sugar rush. Beautiful, intense, and absolutely temporary. You're not actually awakening yet. You're just getting your first taste of what's possible. The real journey hasn't even begun. Then comes the hangover. The blissful states fade, and you're back in your ordinary mind. But now it feels like a prison. You've tasted freedom, and everyday consciousness feels impossibly cramped and limited. So you chase those peak experiences like a spiritual addict, desperately trying to get back to that place where everything made sense. But something else is happening, something far more disturbing. Your old self, your familiar patterns, your comfortable beliefs, your very sense of identity begins to feel foreign. It's as if you're watching someone else live your life. And here's where most people panic, because transformation isn't just getting something new, it's losing everything old. Your ego, sensing mortal danger, fights back with everything it has. Suddenly you're flooded with doubt, fear, and an overwhelming urge to return to normal. This is just a phase, your mind whispers. You were perfectly fine before all this spiritual nonsense. Many listen to that voice and retreat. They convince themselves the awakening was just imagination, just wishful thinking. But you can't unsee what you've seen. Now comes the cruelest joke of all. Just when you commit fully to this path, just when you surrender everything you thought you were, the universe seems to abandon you completely. The mystics call it the dark night of the soul, but that phrase doesn't capture the raw terror of it. It's more like being thrown into an existential black hole where nothing, absolutely nothing, makes sense anymore. Your prayers feel hollow. Your meditation becomes torment. Even the memory of those beautiful peak experiences feels like a cruel joke. You begin to wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. Maybe awakening is just sophisticated self-deception. Maybe you're losing your mind. The darkness is so complete that you can't even remember why you started this journey. And here's the most maddening part. This isn't a temporary setback. This darkness can last months, even years. It's the soul's winter, and you can't think your way out of it. Most spiritual seekers break here. They run back to religion, to materialism, to anything that offers the illusion of solid ground. And who can blame them? The darkness demands a level of faith that borders on madness. But what if this dissolution is exactly what's supposed to happen? But the ego is far more cunning than we give it credit for. Just when it seems to be dying, it pulls off its greatest magic trick. It co-opts the awakening itself. Suddenly you emerge from the darkness with a new identity, the enlightened one. You've read all the books, mastered the terminology, and can speak eloquently about non-duality and consciousness. You see through other people's illusions with laser precision while remaining completely blind to your own. This is perhaps the most dangerous stage of all, because it feels so right. You're no longer seeking because you've found. You're no longer a student because you've become the teacher. Your ego has simply put on spiritual clothing and convinced you it's enlightenment. I've seen this happen to brilliant, sincere people who genuinely had profound experiences. But instead of remaining open and humble, they crystallized their insights into a new spiritual persona. They became prisoners of their own awakening. The telltale sign? You start judging others for being asleep while positioning yourself as awake. You create elaborate spiritual hierarchies with yourself conveniently at the top. The very compassion that awakening should bring gets replaced by subtle spiritual superiority. Real awakening dissolves the one who could be awakened. This stage just gives that one a makeover. And then comes the loneliness, the profound, aching isolation that nobody warned you about. Your old friends can't relate to you anymore. When they complain about their problems, you see the cosmic joke underlying their suffering, but you can't share that perspective without sounding condescending or insane. When they pursue their goals and ambitions, you watch with the detachment of someone observing children playing house. Your family thinks you've joined a cult or lost your grip on reality. You used to be so normal, they say, with a mixture of concern and disappointment. They want the old you back, the one who cared about the right things, worried about the proper concerns, shared their values and fears. But you can't go back. It would be like trying to believe in Santa Claus again. The ordinary world now feels like an elaborate theater where everyone has agreed to take the performance seriously, and you're the only one who can see it's just a play. Yet you haven't found your new tribe either. Most spiritual communities are still trapped in seeking, still playing elaborate games of spiritual materialism. You find yourself homeless between worlds, no longer belonging to consensus reality, but not yet established in whatever comes after. This exile can drive people to despair or back into the familiar prison of ordinary consciousness. The price of seeing clearly is often standing alone. In this loneliness, you become particularly vulnerable to a seductive trap, the perfect teacher. Someone appears who seems to have exactly what you're looking for. They speak with authority about the stages you've experienced, offer explanations for your confusion, and promise to guide you to the final destination. After feeling so lost, such clarity feels like salvation itself. But here's the cruel irony. The moment you make anyone else your spiritual authority, you've stopped awakening. You've simply transferred the seeking from one object to another. Instead of seeking enlightenment, you're now seeking the teacher's approval. Instead of trusting your own deepest knowing, you're trusting their interpretation of your experience. I've watched brilliant seekers become spiritual slaves, surrendering their own intelligence to follow someone else's map. They develop what I call guru addiction, that desperate need for external validation of their inner journey. The most sophisticated teachers know this and create elaborate systems to keep you dependent. There's always another level to reach, another transmission to receive, another teaching to master. Your awakening becomes their business model. True teachers point you back to yourself and then get out of the way. They make themselves unnecessary, not indispensable. But such teachers are rare because they threaten the entire spiritual marketplace. Then comes the most terrifying stage of all, the complete collapse of meaning itself. It's not just that your old life doesn't matter anymore. It's that nothing matters. Love, purpose, beauty, suffering, joy, all of it becomes equally empty, equally meaningless. You don't just lose your beliefs, you lose the very capacity to believe in anything. This isn't depression, though it may look like it to outside observers. Depression still cares. It cares about the pain, the loss, the hopelessness. This is something far more profound. The death of the one who could care about anything. You might find yourself staring at a sunset with complete indifference, or watching loved ones suffer without feeling compelled to help. It's not that you've become cruel. Cruelty requires caring enough to cause harm. You've simply fallen through the bottom of human experience into a vast, empty neutrality. This is where many seekers break completely. They become what I call spiritual zombies, technically alive, but functionally absent from life. Some never recover from this stage, remaining trapped in a kind of living death. But here's the secret that few understand. This void isn't the end of the journey, it's the fertile emptiness from which authentic life emerges. You have to die completely before you can discover what was never born. Most people turn back at this abyss, but a few crazy souls leap into it willingly. And sometimes the psyche simply can't handle the dissolution. What psychiatrists call psychosis, mystics recognize as spiritual emergency, the moment when awakening overwhelms the mind's capacity to integrate the experience. You might start seeing through the veil of ordinary reality so completely that consensus reality becomes impossible to navigate. Boundaries dissolve not gradually but catastrophically. You hear voices that aren't there, see patterns that others can't perceive, know things you couldn't possibly know. The medical establishment will try to medicate this experience back into normalcy. Your family will panic and seek professional help, but you're caught between worlds, too sensitive for ordinary reality, too ungrounded for transcendence. This is perhaps the most dangerous stage because you can lose the thread entirely. Some people never find their way back to functional awareness. They become permanent residents of liminal space, unable to fully return to consensus reality, but equally unable to stabilize in expanded consciousness. Yet for those who survive this breaking open, something extraordinary happens. The very collapse of their mental structures creates space for a more flexible, more authentic way of being. They learn to dance between dimensions without losing their footing entirely. But first, they must endure the terror of watching their mind shatter like glass. And most people simply aren't prepared for that level of disintegration. And then, if you're fortunate enough to survive the complete dissolution, something miraculous occurs. You begin to laugh, not at anything in particular, but at the cosmic joke of the entire seeking process. All those years of striving, all that spiritual ambition, all those profound experiences and devastating collapses, and here you are, exactly where you started, knowing absolutely nothing. But now the not knowing feels like coming home. You realize that every stage of the journey was just consciousness exploring its own nature through the fiction of being you. The seeker, the sought, and the seeking were all movements within the same awareness. This isn't the enlightenment you expected. There's no permanent bliss, no final understanding, no certificate of spiritual achievement. Instead, there's just this ordinary moment, this simple aliveness, completely free of the need to be anything other than what's naturally arising. You discover that awakening isn't something you attain, it's something you stop preventing. It was never hidden. You were just looking in the wrong direction. Like a fish searching for water while swimming in the ocean. The humility is profound and liberating. You're no longer the enlightened one because there's no one there to be enlightened. You're no longer seeking because there's nowhere to go. You are simply life living itself, without commentary or resistance. This is where true compassion is born, not from spiritual superiority, but from recognizing everyone as yourself in disguise. So what's left when the personal self has been thoroughly seen through? What remains when all the spiritual achievements have been revealed as cosmic theater? Just this ordinary, extraordinary moment, not as some grand finale to your spiritual quest, but as what was always here, patiently waiting for you to stop seeking it somewhere else. The awareness, reading these words, the intelligence, understanding these concepts, the life breathing this body, none of it belongs to anyone in particular. You realize that survival was never actually the point. The you that wanted to survive the awakening process was exactly what needed to die. And what you feared losing was only a collection of stories, memories, and preferences that consciousness had temporarily identified with. What survived? Nothing and everything. The body continues to function, thoughts continue to arise, emotions continue to flow, but there's no central controller claiming ownership of the experience. Life lives itself with perfect spontaneity. This doesn't make you special or enlightened. If anything, it reveals how utterly ordinary and natural this recognition is. Every blade of grass, every passing cloud, every crying baby is expressing the same consciousness that you are. The spiritual journey ends where it began, in this simple, present moment awareness that was never actually absent. But now there's no one left to claim credit for the discovery. Now, my dear friends, having walked through these treacherous stages together, let me share something that might surprise you. The question isn't really which stage you're in. It's whether you're brave enough to stop trying to survive the journey at all. You see, I've been talking about stages as if they're sequential, as if you graduate from one to the next like some cosmic curriculum. But that's not quite how it works. These stages aren't rungs on a ladder. They're movements in an eternal dance. You might taste the void on Monday, slip into spiritual ego on Tuesday, and find yourself in the dark night again by Wednesday. The real awakening is recognizing that there's no final destination, no ultimate achievement, no permanent state to maintain. Even this recognition can become another trap if you try to hold on to it. What I've shared with you today isn't meant to discourage you from the spiritual path. Quite the opposite. It's meant to liberate you from the fantasy that awakening is something comfortable, predictable, or ultimately personal. When you stop trying to survive the process, you discover that you were never in danger in the first place. The consciousness that's aware of confusion isn't confused. The awareness that witnesses the dark night isn't in darkness. The life that experiences these stages is always already beyond them. So here's my invitation to you. Stop trying to figure out which stage you're in and start paying attention to what's aware of all the stages. Stop trying to advance to the next level and start recognizing what was never born and therefore can never die. The spiritual path isn't about becoming someone special. It's about discovering that there was never anyone there to become anything. And in that discovery, everything becomes luminously, radiantly ordinary. That's the real secret the few who survive discover. There was never anyone to survive anything. There's just this eternal, intelligent, playful consciousness wearing billions of temporary costumes, pretending to be lost so it can enjoy the adventure of finding itself again and again. And you, my friend, are that consciousness right now, reading these words, perhaps recognizing yourself in this mirror I've held up, not as achievement, not as attainment, but as the most natural thing in the world. Welcome home. You never actually left.